Two different villages, Stahl and Jost. My mother's families, originally in the 1700s in Germany, were Rhinelanders or Hessians. So their dialect was the Hessian dialect, and they settled Stahl. My father's family settled Jost, and they were Swabian, always, or Jostern, what we would call them. Their dialect was different because originally in Germany they came from Swabia, which is closer to Bavaria, so they had a little mountain dialect in them. So that's why the villages, and all the different villages on the Volga, you'll hear some different words. Like Veronica, we say Veronica. My mother's family, the Stahlers, Veronica. My dad's, everything was, I can't even think of the word now, Lauva or something, like means little flopping things, you know. And it's interesting. My mother would always correct my father, and he said, but that's how we always said it. She says, oh, you Josterns. So I don't know if that's true or not, but that's how some of our words are so different. The Germans left, I guess everything was bad in Europe in the 1700s, the middle 1700s. I guess worldwide there was, depression and starvation. And it was after all, Germany was not Germany, actually, until after 1860s. So United States was a country before Germany was really a country. So they were all these little principalities. You can go down the Rhineland now, and every 50 yards is a little castle sitting up on the side. And just think, in the 1600s, you had to pay toll to go down the rivers, all the Moselle or the Rhine. And so, like I say, the Germans, I guess even we grew up, I still have that possession. Everything you have, it's a possession, and you want to keep it. So that's what's happened. And when they settled in Russia, each village had their own acreage or hectares or whatever they called them. The Russians, there was, like I said, in Europe, famine, depression. Catherine the Great, who was not married to Peter the Great. There's a 90-year difference in their ruling. Peter the Great was first. Catherine the Great came later. She was just a 16-year-old girl when she married Peter, a great-grandson, I think, of Peter the Great. She was 16 years old. Her father was a minor prince, one of the little regions out of Germany, Eastern Germany. And she was married to him. I don't know how old he was. They just young teenagers, I think. But she was so strong, and he was not very strong health-wise. So by the time she was 18, she ruled that area. So that's how she became Catherine the Great. And my husband always said, yeah, that's you Germans. You want to rule everyone. So that's why, through the years, of course, she grew power and strength, and really benefited the Germans and Russia, actually. There were flyers out because Russia was going through a lot of changes in their czars, which was not a healthy position to be in, a czar. And they needed structure, and they wanted to have the western side of Russia populated. They was the Mongols, what they have, the Tatars were on the west side near the Volga, and that was not settled yet. So the first groups they sent out were similar to what happened on our plains here. The native people, the Tatars, destroyed the villages, and everyone was gone, killed, of course. So a couple years later, Catherine sent out more people, and hopefully they would be able to survived, which they did. It was not easy. They lived in, actually, from what my mother said they heard, they dug into the snow and built ice houses to live, almost like an Eskimo, I guess. But those second group of colonists, they survived, and they developed the Volga area. Yeah, when Catherine wanted to develop the frontier, the Volga area, they were given so much acreage for each family, so much wheat to grow, and the provisions were there. But when they got out to this frozen area or flooded area on the Volga, it was not what Catherine had promised. She didn't know what it was herself. You know, she just got from her advisors. But they did finally survive, and of course the German character, even to this day, you overcome, and we have this inner strength in us. And don't let anyone tell you it's not to rule someone else, it's to survive. Free military service for all the Germans, for everywhere, for the future, whatever. Each male in the family got a half an acre. So if you had 4 sons, you had like 2 acres. And freedom from military service, as I said. Help with building up the area. And they always had, each village, wherever you went, had one representative to Saratov, which is up the northern part of the Volga. I don't know if that was developed yet, or must have been, because that was the headquarters. And that's where each village had a representative, which would be like our congressman here, to Saratov. And my mother's father, Adam Krell, or Grill, was the stall representative. So he would have to go every 3 months up to Saratov to explain what the village was doing. Well, the women worked hard, and you always had lots of kids in the family. Everyone worked in the fields at harvest time. My mother and my aunt would tell us about the size of the watermelons. They say Texas watermelons or the Alaskan watermelons, which are like a half a yard, were nothing compared to the Russian ones. So they grew a lot of vegetables, and the soil was great for agriculture. And they also had horses, 2 kinds of horses, the fair and the gaul. The fair is a carriage horse, a very pretty Arabian style horse. The gaul is a plow horse, a working horse. And then they also had camels. And my mother couldn't remember if they were the 2-humped or the 1-hump. So, but they were used because the horses refused to go out in the winter because it was cold. And so the camels would go, and they would beast of burdens. And but you really couldn't make pets out of the camels. My one uncle found that out. My mother said he must have done something to the one camel because he couldn't go near the barn if the camel knew he was coming. They had at least 2 camels, my mother said, plus the horses. They had the fair and the gauls and the camels. But my Uncle Henry evidently did something to one of the camels, because if they heard him coming, they spit on you. So. When did they leave? My grandparents left Russia. The Bischels and the Bushes settled in West Fresno, Germantown or Russiantown, and they left in 1903. And my mother's family from Stahl, they left after the revolution of World War I, and they left in 1921. And then they got here at the end of 22. How my family on the A.H.S.G.R, my dad has a story about, I never could figure out, and no one ever explained to me, how they got from their villages on the Volga over to Liverpool, which is off England, the coast of England. But my dad said that he remembers he was not quite 3, staying on the ship on Liverpool for a month, and they were waiting for the Irish immigrants to come on or whatever. And the day before they left for America, everybody had to bring all their belongings up from where they were in the building of the ship, stripped naked, man, woman, and child, on the deck, and they sprayed them with disinfectant. The luggage, everything, blankets, because most of them didn't have luggage. They lived on their blankets, and they wrapped everything up, and that was their carrier. He said, today he died. My father was 74, 75. Last thing he said, you know, I still smell that disinfectant. He said it stayed with him all his life. They fire hoses loaded everybody on the deck and just sprayed them, and then everything was wet. And then they let them stay for a day, everything, the blankets and clothes, but they never really got dry. So you're in the hold of a ship for 10 days, and you imagine what the smell was between the disinfectant and the mold setting in. My mother, when they left Russia, it was late October, and already the river, the Volga, had started to freeze over. So they had to take, and I don't remember whether she used the camels or the horses to pull, but they went on a sleigh up to Saratov on a sleigh. And she said she remembers that, and they just prayed that the river was frozen solid enough that they didn't have to get out and walk, because that was a distance, you know. And then they stayed in Saratov. This is October 21, a week. Well, the papers were finalized. My grandfather, who was the mayor of the town, and the representative to the Tsar's court in Saratov. And they left sometime in October, as I said. Somewhere along the line, they were asked to get out of whatever they were, sled or carriages, and had to walk to the Polish border. Now, it's already middle October. The storms had come in. They'd already lost a woman and her baby. Well, my mother said, retract a little bit, when we asked about it. She said, when you see the movie Dr. Zhivago, she said, when they're in the boxcars being deported to Siberia, she said, that was luxury. We didn't have that luxury. She said, we had boxcars, and she said, that the baby that died, they just threw the baby out in the snow, and then the mother died later. And I had an aunt and a baby. They died in Berlin later. They started out from Stahl, 26 people. Grandfather was the leader. And when they got to the border, must have been 24, 25 people, got to the border of Poland, and everything was to be prepaid. And the 2 guards, I guess, wanted more money, and they said to Grandpa, you can't cross, we need more money. And he said, we gave you money, we have nothing to give. And they said, well, then go back. He said, no, we die here. You either shoot us, let us go by, we can't go back. And he said, well, you know what you're saying, man? He said, we want money to let you go. He said, we're not going, we have no money, we can't go forward, you can't go backward, we'll die here. And my mother said, of all those 20-some people, there was not one breath or one going, oh, nothing. She said it was deadly silence. She said, we all figured we've been through probably hell already. It can't get any worse. So when Grandpa said, we either die here or we go across. And the man said, I can't believe you said that. But he said, see that little light up there in Poland, on that little hill? My aunt lives there. He said, you go up there and tell her whatever the name was, and she'll give you some gruel and put you up for the night. So there were 20-some people in this one-room house with a cow in the corner eating its meal, and the woman fed all these people gruel, which is sort of like our rivel soup, which I love. My mother made it, but she wouldn't eat it. My dad loved rivel soup, but my mother would never eat it. She made it, but never eat it. She said, and that poor woman, she fed us girl soup, and she says, a couple left with my mother. She said, we were so sick we could hardly get it down. And this woman said, I made this for you. You were told to come up here. You're not going to waste it. You're going to eat it. And she says, I think she would have probably beat us if we hadn't either tried to get it down. But they were so ill and tired already. But they stayed overnight, and I don't know how they got to Poland, but probably walking. That's the only thing we knew. Well, they got to Poland, and they were all sick with malaria. Can you believe malaria and dysentery and everything? And they were in the hospital in Poland, Warsaw, or I'm assuming it was Warsaw. And that's where my grandfather passed away. So out of the 24, 25 people that made it to Poland, only 16 arrived in the United States. It took 2 years for the last of that group to get to the United States. But my grandfather died. They lost, a sister was 8 years old, my sister's youngest one. She disappeared, and they think one of the nurses, a Red Cross nurse, was Polish, and she fell in love with Lydia, the 8-year-old, and she just disappeared. The nurse disappeared. Red Cross tried to find him, never could. My uncle, August, named his oldest girl Lydia. So they came to Fresno in 1922, my mother's 16th birthday, November the 22nd, 1922. And they finally reached California, and my mother's uncle, grandma's sister, was a brother-in-law. He's the one that had to pay double for him, so they had to work extra when they came to the United States to pay back, not the first time he sent money, but the second time that was stolen from him when they were in the hospital in Poland. So it wasn't a happy trip, but they were so relieved when they got to Fresno. Then they were signed up for school beginning in January, a Hawthorne School, which is where Memorial Auditorium on Fresno Street is now situated. And she said that was interesting because there were like 15 different nationalities, all first people coming in from different countries. My mother worked. She had an interesting life. My aunt raiding in camps, where Penny's was downtown. Raiding camps was a big department store. So my aunt worked for Radins, and my mother worked for the camp. Two sisters married the two brothers, Raiding camps. That was a big, big department store. And my mother said she was 16, 17. They owned the White Theater, the two families, which was White Opera House. And the vaudeville troops would come through for entertainment maybe once or twice a year. Eddie Cantor came every year for about 5 years. And he was boarded with this family, the camps that my mother worked for. Now, how my mother learned, because I know she didn't do any cooking when they were in Russia, because Grandma had a helper and a cousin that did all that. She made the best apple pies. To this day, nobody can make a crust like my mother. Connie's close. Connie Coberly's close. But any year that Eddie Cantor came through, my mother worked for the family, he demanded Amalia's apple pie. So how my mother met my father, Adam Bishel, he came over in 1903. He was 3 years old. My grandparents had the house on Rose Street. We had 2 bedrooms, a living room, a large kitchen, and a screened-in porch, and an outhouse. Well, when my dad grew about 14, 15, I don't know how these German boys, none of them got formal education in carpentry, but they built houses. So my dad was 15 and put in a bathroom on the screened-in porch, cut it in half, got one toilet, no basin, but a huge bathtub. We used to put 3 of us kids in that bathtub. You could go swim in it. And then eventually put central heating, not central heating, but automatic water heater in the basement, which never was cemented. It was just they dug a cement out of this hard pan, and made shelves out of dirt. So that's where we lived on Rose Street. We called it the big house. So when my mother met my dad, I think they only knew each other a couple months, and they got married. He was 24, she was 18. They got married, and there's a little two-story house, two-room house in the back. Had no plumbing, no electricity, no bathroom, but there was an outhouse between the front yard and the backyard. Grandpa and Grandma had the front house with Uncle Charlie. And so my brother, my cousin Helen Ostergaard, my mother's niece, and I were the three always considered the backyard kids because we were born in the backyard in this little two-room house. And I remember we didn't move into the big house somewhere between my third year and fifth birthday, because I know when I started kindergarten late, I didn't start the first year, I didn't start till February when I was five and a half. First time I can remember leaving the big house. So when we moved into the big house, I don't know, but Uncle Charlie had the bedroom, and then my dad had the screen porch. He never did finish putting in the windows, so Uncle Charlie ended up in the screen porch. And my sister and I and my brother Edward shared the bedroom. My parents shared the big one. But that was something I think you live all the time. And I can remember them hauling that little two-room house. My dad sold it to a farmer for his farm workers and never did put any wiring or electricity in there. And the outhouse became a tool shed. He moved it away, and orange tree grew over that spot, the biggest oranges he ever had. So what's that tell you? Oh, Rose Street, I'll tell you, our block, 2105 Rose Street. At the corner was a Wygant family, had this two-story house, and this alley ran right behind us and her home and Oberg's, first Oberg's grocery store was there, and a liquor store, which later became separated. But then starting from the Wygant's family on the corner was Wolf, one family of Wolves, and then the cousin Wolf on the second one, Andrew Wolf, and his kids and I, we all grew up together, Dolores and Donna and Andy. And then there was Buzik's. His kids all lived out in Biola, his family. And then there was Peterson's, and Peterson boy married my cousin Flack, Louise Flack, that lived across the street on Rose Street. And then there was Mrs. Bowdy and her daughter Annie Hurd. Oh, how this started for the formation of the Historical Society here. The Cross Church, which was the big, at one time, the biggest German Lutheran church in the United States, had a reunion of all confirmants from the church. And I can't remember the date. It must have been in the 70s somewhere. So my husband and I went to that, although my husband wasn't confirmed at the Cross Church. But my mother and my Aunt Marie Ostergaard from Easton, the Krell sisters, we went, and it was a big, it must have been hundreds of people there at the Cross Church, because they had the big social hall. And I think it was like a 3-day reunion or something. And out of that, Ray Schwabelin and Christine Schwabelin and Joanne Klein and Norman Bitter and my husband, who surprised me because he was half Scottish, half German. But out of this big confirmation reunion, they said, you know what, we should do something about the Germans from Russia. Nobody's doing anything. And at that time, there were people here from Colorado. Pastor Kistler was a longtime pastor at the Cross Church. He was here, spoke, and he talked about at Greenlee, Colorado, there was a group starting that wanted to do something about our heritage and starting something. So that is where it really started, out of Greeley, Colorado. Probably 2-3 years to get us together, but Norman Bitter was a great one for pushing, and Ray and Christina, Joe and Climb. And then my husband, who was never a joiner, insisted that we get involved in it. And then we met a couple times downstairs at Fashion Fair. They have this big room. There were about 40 of us that got started meeting. My husband wouldn't take a position, but he did finally take membership. And he'd walk the streets. I think he browbeat or scared everyone because he was a tall man. And if he hollered at you, boy, you'd want to do everything he said, you know. So for being more Scottish, actually, he was. He did well in getting people to sign up. And so we started out with about 30 to 40 people in meeting, and little by little it grew. And then we decided to have dinners. So we'd rent church halls, and we'd have Baroque dinners, make Baroque, or just a dinner and come. And within about 2-3 years, we've got stabilized and had close to 500 people. Ed Brow, one of our first presidents here, outside of H.S.G.R, was a former fireman for the city of Fresno. And at one of our meetings, he said, you know, if we could cough up $63,000, you know, we were meeting every couple months. He said, we've got a building we could buy. This fire station the city abandoned, they wanted to sell it. So we thought $63,000 at that time was a lot of money. So here we go with the Baroques and the noodle soup dinners, and you name it, we did it. And rented out halls, church, the Cross Church and the Zion Church, where whoever had a kitchen, we'd rent it and pay for it. We'd all throw money in the pot, you know. My husband would take off work. Thank God he got paid for sick leave. He accumulated a lot. And that's how it started, little by little, and of course, keep recruiting people and have them getting, you know, interested in it. So we started out real well with a good group of people, and we paid $63,000 cash for this building, and a lot of work. It's still a lot of work, but we had the dedication. It was new. We were young. We were in our 40s. Ray Schwalben was in their 60s, and he was such a go-getter, he and Christina. And, of course, Norman Bitter was great, and his wife. And so it just took all these people to keep interested and get people interested. And it was new, and it was exciting, you know. So now we're to the point where we're old, and I don't know what we're going to do. We got to keep that enthusiasm going. So. My husband played the accordion. My younger daughter, played the piano. And, of course, I was singing in the Cross Church choir. And so every time we'd start a meeting, I would start with singing God Bless America. And somebody said, you know, Vera, why don't you start a chorus? So I said, okay. And then my daughter was supposed to be the piano player. She was only 10. She says, I'm not good enough. Well, 10-year-old kids, they got more interest. So I finally got Eldora Lutz to come and play for us. And we meet at my house once a month. We had, I think, 18 members. Never enough men. So then we decided on we're going to start singing at meetings, and that's how it started out. We sang in German a lot. So before we sang, I'm practically the only one that could read German, not the old script, but German, because I was teaching it here for 13 years, beginning German. So if we sing in a German song, they wanted to know what they were singing. So I'd have to make sure I could translate it, what it was. So I'd sit down the night before and go through everything and make sure I understood what each word meant. Because they'll go, what does this word mean? You know. Then I said, well, I'll have to make sure. So, but we had a lot of fun at my house. 8 years, we just had more fun. And I'll tell you about the one time we went to convention in San Francisco. The Saturday night we performed, and a couple of the women didn't know they were coming. Then they showed up at the last minute, forgot their music. Oh, it was horrendous. So I'm standing up on stage, and these two women who did the same thing when we had rehearsal going, what do I do? I'm on stage with the lights on me. 1,000 people looking at us, expecting beautiful music from this chorus. Two women in the back. We don't have the music. I just gave you the music. Then my husband goes, well, you didn't tell me what. He's on the accordion. I didn't know whether to faint or just say. And then I got the giggles because I was nervous, and I couldn't stop laughing. I turned to the audience and I said, you people want to know why we're stuck together like this? Because I said, we have so much fun trying to remember what we're doing. And the audience went crazy. They thought it was funny. Like my German class the next week, one of the members said, my mother said you were so funny that they thought you guys should have come back and done that the next night. While we were at the convention, everybody wanted to know from the different cities how to start getting either the German course or class. And I said, well, I'm starting a German class for our people and Saturdays. And they said, well, where do you get the material? And I said, well, I've just done a lot of research in libraries and wherever I could go, you know, find stuff. I don't think I could do that now. Though I did run off some material for a couple chapters. So I did that for 8 years. And then we did 13 years at the library Saturdays, one Saturday a month. We started the youth camp here, and every summer for 13 or 12 years, that was a great time. And two of my younger grandsons were members. We had great people here, a lot of support from mothers and grandmothers. They would stay when I was teaching 1 hour class every Saturday morning for youth camp. They sit in the back, and they said, oh, I never knew that. When they come up, and they were learning along with their grandkids or their children. So we don't have that anymore. I don't know what's happened. If it was just lucky at the time, we had the interest in parents and grandparents, or we've outgrown it, or people become so blasé they don't want to care anymore. But we're lucky to have this museum, believe me. Oh, talking about lucky to have the museum, we also have the archives here in the back room. One room filled with records of marriages, deaths, births. Some of the churches, we have the cross church, the confirmation records, their births and stuff. We have a treasure trove here. I don't think, and even our library in Lincoln, Nebraska, our headquarters have the treasures that we have here. On the walls, I'm looking around here, I see all this handwork, crochet work, displays, artifacts that we've accumulated over the years that people just put away in drawers. We have a samovar that someone donated. It's just, people come in here and you'll be surprised what we've found that people had saved. And then in our back room where all the archives of history is, the written words, Selma Wolf was a former member. She started the genealogy section and then getting everything on paper. And you go in the back room and we've got marriages, births, deaths, confirmation. She did the bookbinding herself on those beautiful things. But we had groups of women. She assigned women coming in like 3-4 days a week. And they were each assigned a book. No one else did that book but that person. We would go down to the Hall of Records and copied it. They'd bring it back. We'd put them on, recopy that information from the Hall of Records into these forms that Selma had printed up and turned into books. And I remember my summer off from school was going out to East and picking up my Aunt Marie Krell and my mother, Amalia Krell, bringing them here 1 or 2 Saturdays or during the week when I was off, school was out. And these 2 little old ladies would go down the Hall Records and they'd copy, and then we'd have to recopy everything into these printed forms at Selma. A labor of love, believe me. Oh, and I forgot Thelma Ruby lived out in Easton, so I picked her up too, or she'd drive in. We had, I think in the beginning, people are so enthused that you go out and you tell a friend and they say, well, geez, can I belong on that, you know? And when we had the first Oktoberfest at Edison Social Club, we didn't have baroques. We had sausage and salads, and it was laid out smorgasbord. We had, my husband was selling tickets for $4.50. I don't know how much he had to pay himself just to get people there. We wanted people there. So we had a little over 400 people at the first Oktoberfest. And we did have the good polka band from Sacramento, so that was marvelous. And that's what started it. And the first time at Edison, and for another couple years out Convention Center, because they said it was too crowded, you couldn't dance. So that's where we went into the Baroque making, and my husband would take, if he was in town, worked for the phone company. If he wasn't on the road, he would take off Fridays and take a day of sick leave and come down. And over there is a cutter that cuts cabbage cutter. Yeah. Anyway, it was called the Kraut Schneider, and he would chop the onions for making Baroque, chop the onions, and he'd sit on a bench. We had a little bench, and he'd sit on the bench, and this slides your head of cabbage, sits in here, or the onions, and you could see the metal cutters. And you'd slide this back and forth, and he's on a bench on one end here, sliding this back and forth, and he'd come home, and he'd say, I can't walk, it's like riding a horse all day. And he'd do that for a couple of years till we got all this electrified. But that's how we started, just little by little, and people contributing, contributing little stuff, all this beautiful handwork. You have to come in here and see the dedication that was given to this organization. And we still need people for officers, but we need people that are dedicated. You know, not saying, oh, this is too hard or anything. But, you know, I'm going to be 91, and I don't regret a day of it. The hard work, the tears, the humor, and the fun. If everything goes wrong, you make a joke out of it, believe me. My German class at night from the convention center where everything blew up in my face, one of the students there said, her mother said she never laughed so hard. I said, that's what it is. If you can't do it right, laugh. Oh, we're here 50 years already?
Not in the building, but the
organization. Of the organization, 50 years already. My gosh, where did the time go? I was a young person. I'm 90, almost 91. Where did it go? But you know what? I don't regret a thing. Sometimes you go home heart weary, upset a little bit, because you want people to think the way you do, and nobody thinks like you do. We're all different. But we all have a contribution to give. And do it with a sense of humor, a sense of kindness, and a sense of thankfulness that we have these opportunities. And that's all I can say. Thank you.